So, we're both a little inebriated.
Just a smidge.
Just a tad. So, we just got done watching a movie that we feel like you guys should hear about. What's the name of the movie?
Harrison Bergeron.
Harrison Bergeron.
Yeah, so, I'm going to start with, I feel like this movie is like somebody's trying to disappear the movie.
Yes. I mean, I feel like this is like the banned reading list that you're not allowed to have
Yeah,
anymore.
like, I saw it, I want to say, like, maybe on a TikTok or something.
Yeah, there's one scene that's kind of famous, and we've both seen it on TikToks a lot. So she's like, we didn't really think anything of it, and then it was kind of like hey, that was a really cool scene, so let's watch the movie. And then she's like, well, what movie is that? So she did some Googling until
Which took me weeks. It wasn't like, I'm gonna, find this out today. It was like, hey, there's a scene I like, I don't know what it's from, whatever, and then, 2 weeks of me Googling to, figure out the name, and then it's just not available anywhere.
Right. Literally anywhere. Typically when you Google a movie and you go on it's like IMDb or it's Wikipedia, it shows where can you watch this? How
right.
can you have access?
Hulu,
and the answer to this...
Yeah, Hulu, whatever.
And the answer is...
Nowhere.
Just fucking nowhere.
Yeah. So we couldn't find it anywhere. Weirdly, and I hate this particular platform, but weirdly, I found it on Vimeo.
Right.
Which, by and large, Vimeo is not the most reliable, at least for movies.
I don't know. I feel like... I remember when I was going through film school, this is just a total aside, but being told that Vimeo cared more about the presentation and that if you were going to show your work as a film person, that you needed to have your work on Vimeo. That's where real creators were. So I feel
right. It's not the... To your point, though, it's not
right.
the place to watch blockbuster films. This isn't where you go to watch Guardians of the Galaxy.
Mm-hmm.
This is where you go to watch some random one-off indie film that's not available on DVD.
I feel like from my perspective, it's just a weird platform in the sense of I feel like when I was going through school, it was sold as the place where you put your work because, essentially because you have to pay, and that's true, at least it was when I was there. I haven't been on Vimeo in a long time, so I'm not
Pay to play or
no,
pay to upload?
Pay to upload.
Oh.
So, the idea is because, YouTube does a lot of, technical shortcuts.
Right.
That if you're trying to show your work off to get hired by, say, a studio.
Sure.
That you want, some of the technical details to be right in the way that they do things so that when you upload, really big files, they keep them as pristine as possible, whereas...
okay, so you're talking about, the technical uploading, quality of the video.
Right.
Sure.
So that was kind of what Vimeo was, but, here's the thing, nobody uses Vimeo except for Artsy Fox, so, when you were uploading your portfolio or whatever, Vimeo, no one ever saw it. That was the thing. So.
Right, and, the idea that the only place that you can find this movie is on Vimeo. I looked on every platform, and I even have, a subscription to, pirated films.
Sure.
And there's...
Nothing.
Still
It doesn't exist.
Doesn't exist. And then I even tried to buy it. I even tried to get on Amazon. Can't buy it on Amazon.
Discontinued.
I want to say the only place that I could find it was eBay.
Right, because you could find an old DVD copy. But, I feel like this is a thing where we were talking about, modern... it's 1984, where, the modern narrative erases past instances that disagree with the modern narrative.
Right. So, this to me is very 1984.
Sorry, we have a dog that's trying to crash the camera right now.
Yeah. Just the worst.
Just the worst. But anyways.
Anyways, so this to me was very elevated 1984 in the sense that it took 1984 and made it not more relevant, but like more plausible.
I don't know that it's more plausible, but it basically takes the idea of Marxism that you're trying to equate to the center, and takes it to the extreme or to the ideological conclusion of where you would end that thought at, which is that. So for those of you who don't know, this is actually something that I learned kind of later in life, is that IQ, at least as it was originated, like when you're talking about somebody's IQ, I have a high IQ. So like when I was, I always had to take IQ tests in school, so like, I would get like a 165 or whatever. I didn't know what the fuck that meant. It just, like, I knew that was high.
Numbers, yeah.
Right, just numbers. But what IQ actually is for deviations of norm. So the average person is 100 IQ. So, like, there's just as many people with a below 100 as above. Like, that's generally the idea of a Q.
So it's basically what you're telling me, it's the bell curve.
Right.
So like the 100 of the bell curve
is the tip of the
is 100.
Yes.
And then deviations go from 100 down the bell curve on both sides.
Right. So like
Sure.
the normal deviation, like the center of the bell curve is 100. So like someone who's a 200 IQ, like, is someone who learns twice as fast as the normal deviation.
Right, but just as many people who learn twice as fast, there are just as many people who learn twice as slow.
Right, so that would be like a 50.
Right, okay.
Which I know that might, I feel like you're also talking to stupid people here, but like a 50 is the same deviation from 100 as 200 is above it. Which a lot of people are like, but that's only 50 below versus 100 above. Because you're talking about half and double.
Right. You lost me only because you tried to make it more simple, and by making it more simple, I got it the first time.
Okay, fair enough. I'm just saying that, like, for most... anyways,
Sure.
I have no idea what most people think. I'm just smarter than you. Anyway.
Sure.
I don't know what to tell you. So basically, the movie goes around the idea that as technology and other advances in society occur, what you end up with is a more streamlined and like mechanical advantage of work or the workforce. So to give you an idea, like 100 years ago, half the population worked on farms. Like literally half, because that's how much labor it took to produce food to feed everyone.
Right.
And now you have technological advantages to where there's very few actual farmers or people who work on farms to produce enough food.
One is you have an advancement in technology, but you also have outsourcing. Like...
Outsourcing how?
So you've redistributed the workforce to a global workforce.
Sure, but that I'm not talking about like American versus global. I'm saying...
Like you're talking about a global standpoint regardless.
A global standpoint regardless. It used to be that half of any population had to consistently work towards just food production in order to feed the whole. So the number of people who could stand to have non-farm jobs historically, until we started getting like mechanical industrial advantage, was half.
Right.
Like I'm not trying to create a weird thing. Like it literally took half of the population of food in order to feed people. So like while you had other, more cosmopolitan type of positions, it literally took half of the world's population to feed the other half. In terms of just workforce. And, you need other things in life. I'm not saying everyone can be a farmer, but I'm just saying, if you had less than that, then there wasn't enough food and people starved to death.
Sure. Regardless, the premise of this movie is that everyone is the same.
Right. So that's
it's not even that it's equal. It's that everybody is the same, so that if anybody has...
We're not there yet. We're not there yet. So back to my point is that because of technological advances, I want to say it's like less than 5% of the world's population now is like required to grow the food to feed.
Well, I mean, if you really want to be particularly particular, I mean, we're at a point now, which I don't know if this is common knowledge. I feel like it's common knowledge in areas where we grew up because we grew up in farming type communities.
Sure.
But we're at such a state now where the government actually pays farmers not to grow crops.
Right. Subsidization.
So they will literally give the farmer the exact same amount of money that they would have made
had they
sold their food, and they're literally paying them not to grow food. So from that standpoint, you are at the completely opposite spectrum of where we started, which is half for half. Like half the population is working to feed 100% of the population, where we are at such a state now that you're actually paying them not to because we have such a surplus.
Right, so it's talking about subsidization, and I also think that what you're dealing with now is like we're at a place now where like milk and things of that nature, we let it spoil. So like you figure that like even in the United States we have people starving to death, and rather than give it to those people, because like even grocery stores, like how much of a high percentage of like what's in a grocery store, I want to say it's like 20% of like all of what goes into a grocery store gets thrown away.
Oh, well, I mean, okay, so I actually did work in a grocery store.
Right.
So not only is it something like 20 to 25% of food is disposed of, it's actually not the 20 to 25% spoils. It's that it's not cosmetic. So you have to think about it. You have to kind of, again, I grew up in like an agricultural area.
Sure. We both did.
Two things happens. One, so much of food does not even make it to the store that we don't even know about because the stores that are buying the food deem it not cosmetically viable.
Sure.
So you might have like a misshapen, let's say potato, right? Like your standard potato shape, everybody knows is, you know, oblong. So if you have a misshapen potato, those actually are used to make potato chips.
Sure.
Because they never actually make it to the store. But then, even of the most top quality cosmetically viable food, even from there, 20 to 25% is further damaged or flat spoils. But half of that 25% is just not cosmetically sound. People just look at it and they're like, it's bruised. It's not spoiled. It's bruised. You can eat it. There's nothing wrong with eating a bruised apple. Sure. But yeah, half of the 25% is just not cosmetic.
Sure. Well, I know, I used to live in Idaho, and if you go to eastern Idaho, I was saying like Pocatello region, they essentially, like everyone thinks of the Idaho potato, but I want to say in the heavy potato regions of Idaho, that McDonald's owns most of those crops. So like most potatoes don't actually come from Idaho, and if you go to Idaho, what's actually owned there is owned by McDonald's. Like they own sections of the state, and like a large part of that is they grow a specific type of potato, and they need a certain type of fertilizer in order to create a potato that will pass their inspections. And then when you look at like the poison rate of that potato, like it's the kind of thing like where it's so poisonous that when they spray the poison, farmers can't go into the fields for like 2 weeks.
Yeah, well, it's the same thing with strawberries. So like the reason why there's a top organic food list is that by and large you want to buy certain foods organically, such as strawberries.
Sure.
Because strawberries are so delicate that the amount of pesticides they need to use to keep the strawberries viable until market is so high. So it's much, like if you buy nothing else organically, strawberries...
I don't know, like I was watching a thing on strawberries recently, which is funny because we're mentioning this. You put them in salt water.
Oh yeah, they're like bugs and grubs come out of that.
Yeah, bugs and grubs come out of them.
Yeah.
It's disgusting.
Yeah, so like, you have to think about it in the sense that like berries, by and large, were never crops. People didn't grow berries as crops for market.
They grew wild.
They grew wild. They're a weed.
And you go pick them.
And you would go pick them. So it very much was like, we went out into the forest, oh my goodness, we found this like berry thing. Mm-hmm. We picked all the berries because the deer or whatever haven't eaten them yet. And then it actually, like in Florida, right? There's actually like a children's book that our daughter and I read last year called Strawberry Girl. And so it's about a family in Florida where they were like, you know what? We're actually going to grow strawberries as a crop. And sell them because they're such a delicacy because nobody grows them. They're not a crop because they're so delicate. And so they actually go out of their way to kind of corner the market. And the only reason why they did that was because, to your point, an advancement in technology. So the book basically says because there was a new railroad being built through the town, and because that railroad was equipped with the new, like, state-of-the-art ice boxes, they now had a way to grow the strawberry crops, put them in the ice carts that were in the new railroad, and only because there were now ice boxes carrying ice that now could also house, one little box of strawberries, they could sell them to New York from Florida at this crazy high premium. And so, like, again, to your point, like this, it was never meant to be a crop, but only because of technology, they make it so.
I guess my whole point is this. Like, we're getting to a place now where you go to Walmart and there are no cashiers anymore because, like, they're getting more and more automated.
Right.
And everything's becoming more automated. Like, we were
just
just
funny
talking...
that what state or what city is it that is now getting rid of all of their Walmarts because of...
Chicago.
Chicago is now just getting rid of Walmart because there's too much theft.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, and, like, they were showing, like, the Targets that are still around in the area, and literally every item in the store is behind a plastic, like, case.
Oh, the ones that, like, alarm when you open the drawer? Those are so annoying.
No, but it's like, I mean, like, I know here, and in most places, that, like, things like condoms or perfumes or things that are highly stolen will be behind, like, a plastic case where, like, you can see it. But every item in, like, the Chicago Target is now like that. So,
that's
like, you literally have, like, oh, I want that, you have to go get
an attendant, that is completely throwing the model on its ear. Like, you're creating a model where you don't have to have attendants, but then because you have such a crime problem, you have to supply attendants to gather the item, where you should be, you're trying to create a product, or service rather, you're trying to create a service that is self-serve, but because your audience is so degenerate, you have to then supply a...
You're brown, by the way. You can say that. I'm not allowed to. You can say that.
What, degenerate?
Yeah, no, the fact that... because you're talking about Chicago. Like, there's obviously, like, a racial implication here.
Well, like, it's mind-boggling. Like, yes, I mean, if you want to be particularly particular, yeah, like, I'm brown. I'm not,
Right. That you're married to a white guy, so it kind of... I feel like, in the liberal circles of, like...
I adopted your whiteness.
Yeah, you adopted my whiteness. Like,
sure. What is it? I'm borrowing your white privilege, which, by the way, like, that also just drives me nuts.
Oh my God, this dog is going to kill this podcast. Oh, and her dog took a huge shit. I'm drunk, I don't want to even tell you. So
Harrison Bergeron.
Bergeron.
Yeah, so essentially... he's a 3-year high school...
senior.
Yeah, well, I don't mean high school senior. What is it called when you fail? Like, he's a 3-year held back high school senior.
But
And
the reason he fails back is because in the test you have to go towards the median.
Which is a C.
Which is a C, and if you get too high, you also fail. So if you get too low, you fail. If you get too high, you fail.
Right. So he is perpetually getting A's, and because of that, he's failing backwards. Which, actually, as we were watching the movie, I thought was really interesting, because basically the premise is, realistically and logically, if you repeat the grade, you should increase your knowledge, right?
Right.
Because you're getting the same information over and over again. But he's failing backwards and being punished for retaining the information. So he is, let's say, 3 times as smart as his classmates, but he's being punished because he's repeated the grade 3 times and now he's making A's. But not just that, he made A's the first time. So he's like caught in this weird loop of...
Well, like, if you relearn the same thing, you're going to only get better at it, not worse. But they're rating him to get worse, which is also
right,
stupid.
like it's a weird... Yeah, like he has to... But they're also... I should say that the whole premise of the movie is that everybody is basically average, which they're defining as a C student, right?
Right. So
like,
they
there's wear these bands.
Right.
And these bands are supposed to normalize the population, but it only works one way. And the one way it works is it brings the top level down. Mm-hmm. So what they're hoping is that if they bring the top level down, they can elevate the bottom level and meet in the middle. But the movie actually never addresses how they elevate the bottom level. Like, the bottom is just if you're...
I mean, I would imagine it's a placebo to wear a band. Because, let's say... Because here's the other part of this. Like, when it's time to get married, it's an arranged marriage. The computer figures out who you should marry. So, let's say that, Bergeron has a 150 IQ, right?
Right.
So they're going to pair him with someone with a 75 IQ.
Right, because they're hoping that genetically they're doing the nature
right
versus nurture. So they're discounting nurture and they're saying, okay, so if we just take it from a natural standpoint, matching a high with a low,
it'll even out.
It'll even out. Whereas if we just keep on matching medium with medium, we're always going to get medium.
Right.
So,
but there's always going to be some low and some high.
Right.
So, but it's also funny because the girl he gets matched with, who's a low, also gets made fun of for being stupid. So at least in this world, there's cognition that the stupid is still stupid to the normal.
Right. Like, you can still be stupid, but it's basically...
No, they're also trying to get rid of stupid.
Right. Like, they're trying to widen the bell curve so that the bell curve has as minimal highs and lows as possible.
To narrow the bell curve then. Widening it would be having a greater differential, whereas narrowing it would be let's say 100 is the normal. You want to get in that 90 to or 95 to 110 range.
Right. Regardless, I'm thinking of population-wise.
Sure.
They're trying to widen the population number in the sense that as many people, if before only 50 people fell into that normative that they've declared is their standard,
right.
Now they want 100 people, 1,000 people, 1 million people to fall into that normative.
Well, I think one of the things we kind of got lost on is as you have more and more technological advancement, what you end up with is the labor jobs that, I remember my grandfather was a welder, he owned a steel mill, that people like him would go away. Those types of jobs, that essentially factory workers were the thing of the day. So now in America, because machines have taken all of the jobs, and it's really funny, I remember reading a statistic saying that most of the jobs in the United States today are in big business and financing.
Sure, that makes sense.
There's 3 industries. There's big business and financing, electronic development, technological development.
Also makes sense.
And service industries. And service industries makes up 70-80% of the country.
That absolutely makes sense.
So that 70-80%, that service industry is typically speaking not a like high-end job. Like you're a waiter, you're whatever, but you're dealing
Right, you're a call center rep.
Right, because most people feel more comfortable dealing with a person than they do a machine.
Yes.
But because you end up paying more and more and more for that, what's happening is those jobs are going away. Like the service industry is largely going away because we can automate it.
Sure, which is a weird thing in that humanity hates it. Like,
right. Humanity hates it.
We hate it, but we're still doing it because...
Bottom line.
Well, not just the bottom line. Even though humanity hates automation, we also hate paying for personalized service. So it's a huge, like, counter...
Right, like
thing.
I mean, if you think about like customer service, like typically the joke is it all goes to India. All the call centers are India,
Right.
and like they don't understand English to the degree that we do.
Sure, they would argue that there's more of them that speak English than we do, but sure.
I mean, there's a billion of them, but most of them don't speak English. But like the kind of English they do is mostly British, but it's also this weird subsect of like Indian English.
Right.
Which is also funky. So not only is it not like American English, it's English, but it's also through the prism of interpretation and then a subsect of people who speak it within themselves and who have created their own dialect.
Sure, and I love that there was some like there was this like high corporate guy who was like, they speak English.
Mm-hmm.
Let's hire those guys.
Right,
It'll be fine.
Because it's cheaper.
Because it's cheaper.
But then, like, whenever you call a helpline, no one can help you. Like,
Yeah.
No one understands you. No one understands your whatever. And, like, there's also the part of this where the Indians that get hired for these jobs are so afraid of losing these jobs that they're going to toe the party line and not actually...
Oh, yeah. They do not deviate from the script.
They do not deviate from
Will not. You will answer the question, and they will still ask you the question, and you really want to strangle them, because you're like, I literally just told you, and they're like... And they can't even tell you, look, lady, the reason why I'm asking you the question is because I'm on the script. They're just like, look, I got a script.
Yeah.
Sucks to suck.
So we're going to play dumb until you answer something we can understand.
Which is the exact point of this movie. The whole point of this movie is just stick to the script.
Mm-hmm.
Do not deviate. Just keep towing the party line.
Right.
Like ignore common sense.
There's no common sense though. I mean, the one thing I will say about the movie is that I feel like it made the average dumber than it is.
But I also feel like that was on purpose. Because remember, like, at the very beginning of the movie, I was like, I bet that they pushed, like, because it makes a big point of saying that it's 2050 something.
Sure.
And it's got a very 1950s aesthetic. And I remember, I looked at you and I was like, I bet they pushed backwards on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they pushed forward and went backwards on purpose. And then the movie says, oh, yeah, that was done on purpose. It was intentional because... by and large, the 1950s are romanticized. Everybody was happy. Everybody got along. Everybody was, did their traditional roles.
Mm-hmm.
So, what did she say? Happiness by nostalgia?
Sure.
Or something to that effect?
Though, but by the time of 2300, you're talking about, like, I mean, here's the thing, right? Like, I remember I did a thing for a local community, whatever. So, like... it was the year 1920. It was actually kind of funny because this happened in January of 2020. So, like, this is before the outbreak, like, when people were still really optimistic.
Sure.
Like
it'll pass.
Well, no, like, it hadn't even come out yet. Like,
yeah.
Like there was no corona.
Oh, yeah, no, you're right. Because people didn't really start thinking about it until maybe March.
Right, so this is January. And I remember making a thing of, like, well... we were supposed to do a banquet for the local, like all the local businesses. Like it was the county.
What is it called? Like the Business Commerce Association.
Right. I'm a little drunk, so I'm thinking of words, but like something of like that. And it was supposed to be like a 20s aesthetic. So everyone was doing like the flapper girl 1920s.
Yeah, 1920s.
So like for our business, we're like, like we can be smarter than that. So we actually looked up what was the aesthetic of the 1820s.
Oh, that's cute.
Right.
Okay.
And like we did that as our thing, and like we actually did like a deep historical dive of the 1820s, but like researching it, I knew none of these facts as like a whatever thing, because like it's just too far long ago. Like I know history, but like thinking about like, oh, what was going on and what was the fad of the 1820s,
right.
most people are going to be like, what the fuck are you talking about? So my point is that like, if you think about this as being 2356, we're now talking about 300...
Oh, no, it's not 23, it's 2056.
Oh, it's 2050. I thought it was 23.
No. I remember, because I thought that, oh, how funny, like, I will have actually lived to see 2053.
Okay, well, regardless, you're still talking about 100 years of removal.
Right, because the movie was made in the 1990s. If we're being, because we were talking about the 18 whatever.
Right.
Like, this movie was made in the 1990s.
So, like, essentially we're talking like a specific decade, 100 and whatever years ago.
Right.
I mean, you might as well talking about the 1820s at that point in terms of like I feel like most people look at like, what have you done for me lately?
Right.
So thinking about like the 1820s, or like, I mean, think about like a random decade from history. Like, do you know what was going on in the 1650s? Of course you fucking don't.
No.
You don't. No one fucking does. Like, I'm not trying to be like shitty and act like you're stupid. Like.
Yeah, no, like, unless you're, like, I know what happened in 1942.
Right.
Yeah, but like, or...
Yeah, like World War II and stuff, like big events in history, but like, if we were to pick a generic part of history in a generic decade, nobody knows what the fuck
you really
So
can't.
the idea that people would be nostalgic for a time they never knew, like how can, like, it's the idea of you being nostalgic for the 1820s.
Well, it's like, it's like the idea of like, oh, I'm romantic for like, where people are like, oh, I'm romantic. It's the Bridgerton effect. Mm-hmm. Like, oh, I'm romantic for like old European, and you're like, old European, like, what kind of old European? There's
because people have no idea.
Well, there's like King Louis, right? Mm-hmm. You have the King Louis era. You have the Victorian era.
But from what era? I mean,
like you have, and people are like, no, it's all the like fancy dresses and tea and crumpets, and you're like, do you realize that that's an entire century?
Centuries. Well, like, it's funny, like as somebody who's of Celtic descent myself, like, and we've talked about this before, is like the tartans. Like, yes, people wore tartans, but the specific idea that different clans had specific patterns that everyone wore. Yeah, no. It's a stupid. Super modern. Super modern. And like the guy who invented the idea that like, like you can look up your name and look up the tartan pattern is a super modern idea, but because it comes from like, this is your heritage and you can connect to your like perceived nostalgia, then therefore people bought into it and are like, I'm a McGregor and I can look at the McGregor clan.
Right, but we've also talked about how just ridiculously stupid that would have been in practice. Like the idea that the, let's call it like head matriarch, would have just come up with a pattern, and she would have had to individually teach each of her successors and like everyone
in the village.
Yeah, like she would have had to go to every single seamstress in the village and be like, look, when you weave, you can only weave like this because the McGregors put the red line next to the yellow line.
Exactly 2/3 of an inch.
And it's exactly 2/3 of an inch. But by the way, we're also like making our yarn by hand, and it's also kind of wonky.
Right. I mean, it sounds like the world's worst HOA. Is what it sounds like.
Yes. No, really. Like the Karen.
Right.
The Karen of Scotland and the Karen of Ireland was like, I don't know. Let me whip out my ruler and like check out your tartan pattern because it may, you may have conflated this pattern.
Right. You can no longer be a McGregor.
Shame. Just out of the village for you.
Right.
Yeah, like it's ridiculous.
But like the moment that they like put that thing that like you can identify your people by this thing, it's sold like gangbusters.
Well, yeah, but it goes back to what everybody is doing today, which is like, we own the braids. I'm sorry. You don't own the braids. I love to love you, but like there's Dutch braids and there's Native American braids and there's like African, the idea that one person, one person in the entire globe, looked at hair and was like, I know what to do with it.
I'm going to tighten a knot.
We're going to tighten a knot repeatedly, and we're going to call it a braid, and no one else can do this. Like,
right.
Explain this to me like I'm 5.
Right.
Like, how do you own this?
Right.
Like, that doesn't make sense to me.
Even if hypothetically you have Native Americans and Europeans and Asians and Africans and the Aborigines of Australia, and like they all come up with this themselves, but at different times. Like even if you could prove that, like, you know what, it's those damn Aborigines, they came up with the braid first.
So we're gonna give it to them.
We're gonna give it to them and just not do it anymore, even though this has been a practice of like the last 2,000 years.
Yeah, I don't say, like, you don't make fun of me to be mean, but you make fun of me frequently when I, like, braid my hair in 2 braids. Mm-hmm. Like, that's a hairstyle that I've been wearing since I was a child. So
that's what I make fun of her for, it's the handlebar.
Like, it's just so easy. Like, my hair is...
It
My hair is... But, like... Without interruption, peanut gallery. Like, my hair is curly, it's unruly, like, I just... It's so much easier to just braid it in 2 braids, like... Mm-hmm. But the idea that, like, a Native American could come to me and be like, no, there shall be no Pocahontas braids for you, like...
Right.
I'm sorry.
Right.
Then you, like, I feel like the appropriate response is, then you deal with it.
Right.
Like,
well, I mean, like, here's the thing, is, like, you know, when you look at foods, like, this idea that, like I've heard people say you're not allowed to eat Asian foods because, like, whatever.
Oh my gosh. Can you imagine our daughter if somebody came up to her and said she wasn't allowed to eat sushi? Straight die.
Well, like we were just talking about this earlier, is, like, most people don't realize that, like, because, like, I've been to China before, and, like, what we think of as Chinese food is not Chinese food, it's Chinese American food. Like, what happened, the actual, like, etymology of, like, the creation of what we think of as Chinese food was that the Chinese people came over and they were working on the railroads.
Right, and a lot of people don't even know that. Like, I feel like you can't, it's not even fair to say they forget.
Right.
Like,
they never were taught.
They never knew.
But here's the thing, like generally speaking, it was the Asians and the Irish, like the poorer people.
Which is hilarious to me that those are also people that are ostracized.
Right.
Like, Asians and Irish actually worked on the same projects, hand to hand, like elbow to elbow.
Right.
On the, like, they built the railroad literally from coast to coast.
Right. But the thing is the Irish, it was not socially acceptable to know how to cook as a man because it showed that you didn't have a woman. Like, it was a woman's job to cook. So it was not the same idea for Asians to be able to cook. So a lot of the Asian men cooked meals and they would cook it with whatever was there, which is not the same sorts of ingredients that they would have in Asia and in China. So, like, the dishes that were created by the people on the railroads were cooked and sold to the Irish immigrants by the Chinese immigrants, and it turned into Chinese food.
Sure. But really what it was is 2 people in an environment where they were unfamiliar and did not have either the tools or the resources or the cultural norms. Like, I mean, they didn't generally take their wives along an entire coast-to-coast journey.
Absolutely
so
not.
it was basically like a do what you can with what you can.
Sure.
And we did what we could with what we could, and now we have a whole industry that's nationwide of Chinese food.
Right.
Because Asian people were like, you'll buy this, and I don't have to build that.
Right.
I'll open a restaurant.
Sure.
You go on, you build the railroad.
Right.
I'll be the cook. No problem.
Well,
that makes sense to me, though. Like, from a practicality standpoint, that makes sense to me because that's what societies should do. Like, by and large, you should have a group of people where one person says, I can do this, I can't do that, so you do that, and I'll do this. And I'll provide this service for you, and you provide this good for me.
Well, like, what's interesting to me is, like, I mean, we're getting way off topic here, but, like, our daughter comes from a mostly Hispanic background.
Sure.
And I will call her coconut in the sense that, like, she doesn't really take to it all that well. But there are certain Mexican dishes that, since we've moved to Appalachia, that, like, she looks at the, I'm going to call it white Mexican food that's served locally, and she's like, that's lesser than, because I can't get this. And it's like, here's the thing, like, I appreciate that, like, the world at large has looked at Mexican food and not taken it for all of its complexities. However, like...
I know you're talking about our daughter, but, like, it breaks my ever-loving heart to, like, reading the menus.
Sure. But my point is, like, just the idea of, like, a tortilla and how just versatile it is. And, like, as a white person who grew up here in Appalachia, like, you throw some shit in a tortilla, you wrap it up, and it's better than bread. And, like, it just makes sense. Like,
I'm only laughing at the versatility of a tortilla because you make fun of me about what I put in my tacos, which...
Well, I mean, like I will say that a peanut butter and jelly taco, or... Because here's the thing, like, for those of you out there that are just straight white, like me, when I grew up, I was raised on a Taco Bell menu. Like, that was legitimately the only Mexican restaurant in town when I grew up. So, like, a taco is a hard shell and a burrito is a soft shell, which I've been informed is technically incorrect.
I mean, it's not technically incorrect. It's wrong. Just wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
But the idea of, like, a tortilla and you throw stuff in it is fine, but, like, I hear, like, a peanut butter and jelly tortilla, taco, burrito, whatever the fuck you want to call it, bastardization, abomination. Like, I just think about that and I'm like, that's wrong. Like, wrong.
You've yet to try it, so I feel like...
That's fair. But I also feel like abomination, I don't want to try it. I have no desire.
Your loss?
Anywho. But back to the point is that you go back to the people in this thing, and you have the dumb people, like the 80% that are working the service jobs, and they basically get taken out by technology. So then you have the 80% of people who don't have jobs, and there's a civil war because they're like, hey, we're people too, there's a humanity there. So they enforce this rule that everyone has to go towards the mean.
I wish they would have made a bigger point of that in the movie. They said that one time in a classroom, and it was a straight classroom setting. Classroom, students, the teacher, whatever. She asks the question, and he repeats the story.
The fake history, yeah.
The fake history. But I really wish that the movie had created this... I wish the movie had expanded the scene so that it was more of a dialogue, where there was more of a, like, this is why it happened. Like, you were talking about the pace of the movie being very slow and whatever. Like, if we were to change the pace of the movie and remake this...
The idea of the movie was very good, but the
execution was so-so.
Yeah.
But I really wish that they had expounded on that more, because I feel like the movie is so slow, it's easy to tune out. And so, like, I was very engaged because this was a movie that I was really interested in. I've been waiting, like, a month to watch it.
You also love, like, the 1984, the Brave New World type of things.
I've really
been rereading them lately.
Yeah, like, I've reread the classics lately. I've rewatched the originals.
The social engineering type of...
Yeah, I really do. I'm a sucker for sci-fi and, like, social... whatever. But, like, it's so easy to tune out. And it was the fact that it was just maybe 1 or 2 minutes. I doubt that if it made it to 2 minutes...
I don't think it was. I think it was like a whole minute.
I think it was just maybe 1 minute of the film. And I really wish that they had expanded on that.
Which is the 1 minute that was on, like, the TikToks and things, I think.
Right, which... I get why that 1 minute made it out into the world, because that's the 1 minute that's very dynamic.
Sure.
But again, because the movie is so slow, the possibility or chance that you are tuned out during that section of the movie, it's 60 seconds, it's in the middle-ish part of the movie.
Yeah, 20-30 minutes in. About
yeah,
hour and a half, hour and 40 minute movie.
Yeah, so like the possibility of you turning to your spouse, your kid, your dog, your whatever, and saying, I'm going to get a bottle of water, whatever.
Take a piss, yeah.
Yeah, like you're gonna miss it.
Right.
Which, yeah. Anyways, I interrupted you. But yes, like I wish that they had made a bigger point of that. But the whole point was that there had been a social recession. 90% of the population was unemployed. 10% of the population was employed and smart. And so the 90% that was unemployed and stupid
were jealous of the 10%.
Yeah, so they overran or overtook the 10% and basically demanded, in this case, we'll conflate equality and sameness.
Right, because like it's weird to where I think that what they were doing as the sameness was actually around 80, 85 IQ, somewhere in there. Not like even 100. Like it was so dumbed down that it was like painful. Like I mean, I feel like these were. It felt almost like a 1950s variation of.
What is it? What's the name of the character in Back to the Future? That's
Marty McFly?
Opposite of Marty McFly, the bully.
Oh, I can't think of his name.
Regardless, the bully, it's his IQ.
Sure.
It's like, it's very much the...
Buff or Biff?
Biff! It's Biff.
Yeah.
It's very much the Biff IQ. Like, it's basically a world full of Biffs. Where, and I'm not saying that to be, like, they're mean. They're not mean. It's just the Biff IQ.
Well, there's a weird, like, altruism that goes to it, too, because, like, there's also a part to this in sports where everyone has to be equal and equal opportunity. So, in other words, like, if you were to think about this in terms of, like, the NFL, right? Like, if you win the Super Bowl, then everyone on your team gets kind of hobbled a little bit.
Well, no, I mean, it's not kind of hobbled. Like, let's not mince words. Like, they are actually hobbled. And for people who don't know what that means, it doesn't mean that you're permanently crippled. It means that somebody, like, ties your legs together so that your stride isn't as long. So, like, the dad
actually... Or, like, maybe even broken, or, like, they mess with your muscles.
The dad actually says it. The dad says, that quarterback is too good, even with his blinkers on. And he goes like this, as if to mimic that the guy actually, not only does he have blinders, but they blink in his eyes. So he's wearing a prosthetic debilitatory device to blink in his eyes to make him a worse quarterback, because that would normalize his ability with the opposing
because you would never want to see someone be too great.
Right, and that's the point, because like another part of the movie is there's like a male ballerina. I forget what you call them, but like a male ballet dancer, and the male ballet dancer is just off the chain. And I won't say it for like these terms, but for movie terms, off the chain. And the main character, Harrison, actually is like mind blown, and he's like, oh my god, I've never seen this on TV before. And then he even goes so far as to say, I wonder what's going to happen to him.
Right, because they actually show people who go against the system and they're just murdered. But like, the most interesting part of the film to me was this. Because there are other civilizations in existence, and only in the film, at least, the United States has adopted these policies.
Correct, you're right. So it's not a global policy, it's a United States policy.
Which I don't think could exist, because, like, if you think about this in terms of, like, the military, right?
I disagree, because it does now.
What do you mean?
I mean, we have Korea, who is an entire population who... Their education is very stunted. So like, I disagree, because remember how we were talking about, like, you can't bluff a novice, or you can't bluff, like, a stupid person, because if a stupid person tells you, I'm going to punch you in the face if you keep on picking on me, they're not smart enough to lie and bluff and do, like, social engineering. So when you're dealing with a stupid person, and the reason why smart people are scared of stupid people, which we often conflate with aggressive people, is because you know that when a stupid person tells you, stop, or I will insert whatever,
Right.
they will do the insert whatever. So the reason why Korea is so scary to us is because we know that if they say, if you do that, I will do X.
I disagree completely because Korea bluffs all the time.
Well,
I mean, they've been bluffing that if you do X, we'll do Y for decades, and we keep doing X, and they never do Y.
And they never do Y. So maybe they're not the extreme example like in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Because in the movie, there is the United States president who gets into a political situation where he says, stop, if you do this, I don't know what he actually said.
Don't mess with us.
Don't mess with us or we'll fuck you up. He says, like,
Right.
Don't fuck, like, they make
Don't
fun of it.
fuck with us or we'll fuck you up.
Yeah, he says something to that effect. But it goes back to, like, you don't mess with stupid people.
Right. Well, it's also funny. Well, I don't know if that's true, too, because I feel like it has to do with resolve. But I was actually watching there was a really good quote from McClintock. I was watching a John Wayne movie last night because I had trouble falling asleep after he went to sleep. And there is a great quote in the film that says, like, this dude's wife is with, they're not doing well together. And, like, he runs a ranch out west, and she, is in polite society out east in, like, New York and D.C. and all the things. And she was, he was saying he saw a picture of her dancing with another man. He's trying to be all jealous and trying to insinuate that she might be having an affair. And she says, "Don't worry, darling, he's a gentleman." And John Wayne says, "In order to be a gentleman, you have to be a man first. And since I decline to believe that he is a man, it's not a choice. It's a groveling tactic to get what he wants." I feel like the psychology and the philosophy of that statement is so deep. Like, I feel like we could do a whole thing on just that statement. Because
I feel like we should do a whole thing on John Wayne.
Yes, that's also true.
Are you getting all the feels?
Yeah, all the feels.
I feel like next to this poster should be a John Wayne pointing at this poster.
It will happen soon.
But regardless, like, this movie really is... I wish that the movie had a better pace. Mm-hmm. Because it's a great movie.
It's a great idea. I don't know if it's a great film. It's a great idea.
I will concede. I'll concede on... It's a great movie for people like me who really like this idea of dystopian futures, but not the... I hate using...
It's not a well-made film.
It's not a well-made film, but it's like it's the dystopian future before it got...
There's plenty of stupid movies that are well made that are like you leave the picture like you enjoyed it while you were there, but the moment you think about it, this is dumb. This is the kind of movie where it's a slog to sit through, but when you leave, you think about it. Yeah, well, like what I was gonna say is like there's a lot of people who like the dystopian future movies, but only because of the cinematicness of it. So, for example, like Hunger Games. Oh my god, I hate Hunger Games so much. Or what's the other one? The Divergent. So there's like a lot of people who got into like the dystopian future, but for people like me, who I was into the dystopian future before the cinematic version, this is that. This is not a, hold on to your seats because there's action and... There's no action. There is action in one scene, and it's the last scene of the movie. But we're not gonna because you would have to watch it. But like quite literally, there is only one action scene. I wouldn't say there's any. It ends the movie. The thing about Hunger Games to me is you have an entire novel about the politicization and consumerism of violence. Sure. Which is like talking about how disturbing violence actually is, and then how consumerism creates it to be digestible to people. And then you made a very digestible movie about violence in the Hunger Games films. Yeah, because the books actually are brutal, gruesome. Yes. They are awful. But I feel like if you made the books as they are, you'd have a hard time getting an R rating, and this was a straight PG-13 with no issues, like the movies. Sure. But again, this is Idiocracy
elevated and like on a very demure
controlled
pace.
Like again, it's the social planning of Idiocracy is what it is.
It really is. And for people who like movies where you think about things and you really turn to your partner, spouse, best friend, whatever, whoever your movie buddy is, and you really turn to them and you're like, let's like talk about this shit because that was fucked up. Like, this is that movie. Like, this is the movie of like, where are we really going as a society, and are we really going in that direction? Because I can see parallels, I can see this, that, and the other, and it's definitely I'm gonna drink wine and watch this movie, and we might
drunk because you can't watch this sober because it's too depressing.
Well, sure, but I would even go so far as to say that it's a pause and talk movie. Like, it's so many things happen, and then you're bored, so you pause it, you talk about it, because there are high-level and intellectual things that happen, it's just not action-y.
Sure.
And so it's definitely a pause and talk. Yes.
Though I will say one thing that I know is going to upset people.
Oh, Lord.
You know what I'm going to say. You know where this is going. That in the film, like, basically they said that no high achievements can be created because of this equalization. So, according to the film, the height of all art...
Oh, I mean, all art, of any art form.
Of any arts, of movies, of writing, of music, of anything, is jazz. Which...
Just, I mean, steak right in the heart.
Oh, I hate jazz so much. Literally, the difference between jazz and playing random notes to me, there is none.
There is none.
There is. I also feel like...
Which I like that you expressed such frustration with, like, making... What are the turkey gobble noises? Yeah. And our daughter was just like, jazz is the greatest. And you're like...
Neither one of us like jazz. But, like, I also find the funniness of, like... Like, this movie, like, it's an interesting point, but I don't feel like it's fully conceptualized in the sense that, like, in the film, it's like, you can tell that the people who wrote this film are not geniuses, and it's, like, them projecting what geniuses are, because, like, their other idea of classical music is Beethoven, and I feel like everyone knows Beethoven, but it's also easily consumable the same way that Mozart is, which is the number two. But, like, you know who the music nerds listen to? There's really only two. There's Bach.
And Wagner.
Those are the two. Bach and Wagner. But, like, if you said Bach or Wagner to, like, the movie going on, so what the fuck is that? Wagner? Who?
Well, I feel like the other one is maybe, like, Tchaikovsky. Like, but that's... But...
I mean, we can do Mahler in there, too, if you really want to get into it.
I feel like... Maybe it's just me in that I feel like people should know who Tchaikovsky is, because... If you have ever experienced Christmas,
sure,
you have watched The Nutcracker.
But again, I feel like that's like, and like here's the
thing. Tchaikovsky wrote The Nutcracker. Like,
right, I understand.
I feel like this, like, I understand that I feel like this information should be widely known, but I also know... It was
our generation, but then, like...
Yes, which
George Bush and, like, the Common Core came in.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. What I was going to follow up with is, while I realize that I feel this way, my feelings can go outside and shoot themselves.
Right, and the idea that, like, you know, like, I feel like when you talk about Beethoven and Mozart... You get like 80% of people, then you throw in Tchaikovsky, and then it's like, oh, you maybe get 50.
Well, you might throw in Tchaikovsky, but you have to caveat with the Nutcracker dude.
Right, and then you throw in Bach and Wagner, and you might get 40%. But then I threw in Mahler, and like that went like steep fucking nosedive off the cliff. No, Mahler?
Only the piano players that were still playing piano in like junior high and high school are like, oh, that guy.
He didn't do any piano. Like, here's the thing, you don't know who Mahler is. Mahler basically made, like, if you could throw as many, like, instruments at an orchestra, he just bigger. He only wrote, like, a couple of symphonies because, like, all of his symphonies
He didn't have any? I feel like...
No, he wrote, I want to say, like, 8 symphonies, and they're all, like, a Mahler symphony is, like, as big as you can fucking get. Like they're hard to produce because of how many instruments you have to get into, like, most orchestras don't even have enough instruments.
I guess I had always just assumed that because he went big, he included the piano.
I'm not saying there's not a piano in there. I'm just saying, like, he doesn't, like, like Beethoven and a lot of these people, even Wagner, have like piano
right.
concertos and things of that nature. Wagner did not. He did like I want to say 8 symphonies, and they're all like fuck off big.
Sure. Okay.
No, actually, I think it's 10. I think there's a very round number. I don't know. Anyways, besides the point. Like, I'm totally off track here, but...
Yeah, regardless, I mean, if you're like me, who you like elevated pause and talk movies where you're like, I really want to, like, think about this and, like, mull it over for 2 or 3 days and, like, whatever. It's also, it's not an older film in the sense that it's, you know, from, let's say, like, the 60s or the 70s or the 20s or whatever.
Sure.
Like, it's not so old that that you've never seen any of these actors in that stage of life.
Sure.
But it is older in that most people don't generally go looking for older films. Also, it's a weird film to find. Like, we talked about that. Yeah. Like, the only place you can find it is
It wasn't a big hit when it came out, but, like, it feels... like suppressed in a weird way.
Yeah, because like I've gone and looked for A Brave New World. I actually like that movie and I've watched it several times, many times. There's another one that I've watched several times that's made along the same. You sent me the YouTube video of it. Clockwork Orange. Like I've watched Clockwork Orange several times over, and those movies aren't easy to find in the sense that you're not going to find them on Netflix.
Clockwork Orange you can.
Really?
Yeah.
I've actually never seen it on Netflix, but my point is that they're not so popular.
I feel like it's been taken off recently because it's a Warner...
a Warner film?
Right, so it would be on HBO Max, though that's now just turning into Max, and I feel like every couple of months they change the names of these things. But
sure, but again, like generally people don't go out of their way to find these movies. Like, you actually have to either already know where to find it, or what have you.
I don't know. Like, I remember in the 90s, like, I'm not going to say, like, because I grew into Camp Kubrick, who directed Clockwork Orange in middle school.
Sure.
Like, I discovered him in middle school. I actually discovered him because he was on the AFI Top 100 when that came out. And I saw... Actually, the first film of his I saw was Full Metal Jacket, and that blew me away to where I like went back and I found out Full Metal Jacket was the worst film he made.
Yeah. Well, regardless, like I feel like we should go back and rewatch some of these movies and do movie reviews because, again, like most people don't even watch these, don't know that they exist. But it's it's pause and talk movies. It's not, hold on to the seat of your pants because we're about to go,
Right, well, I feel like we've gone... I mean, I'm not saying that this is a good film in that sense because I feel like you do need to show more than say. And I feel like this did the opposite of movies where it told more than showed.
Yes.
But, on the other hand, we've become the opposite of cerebral to where we can't even hold a concept in our head without explosions. And you know what's really funny?
That's hilarious that you say that. We can't hold a concept in our head without, like we just...
CGI explosion.
Right, because the whole point of this movie is that they're wearing headbands.
Right.
And that the moment they hold a thought in their head, the headband
zaps it out.
Sends an electronic discomfort. I don't know what exactly it is, but...
I mean, it's science fiction.
Right. So it sends some kind of electronic or brain disruptor, discomfort, something that actually prevents people from holding a thought in their head.
Well, like, what's funny to me is I know you like the film Waterworld. So I'm not going to try and shit on the film.
Oh, yes.
The Kevin Costner film.
Yeah, it's one of those.
Right, but I feel like, to me, I really enjoyed the Mad Max films, and this feels like Mad Max on water when I saw it. I remember seeing it in theaters and loving it.
It is. Actually, you know what? It is. Like, Waterworld is very Mad Max on water.
But the reason I bring up Waterworld has nothing to do with that. What happened is most people don't know that the film actually turned a profit because it was, at the time, the most expensive film ever made. And it was talked about as if it were a bomb. And the reason, bomb meaning financial failure.
Sure.
And the reason why that was is when they released it in the United States, it actually was a financial hardship. It didn't make any of its money back in the United States. So what they decided is they were just going to keep releasing the film abroad. And they released it in China, and it was a huge success in China. It made, like, all the money back and then some, and actually turned a profit directly from the Chinese markets. And what they realized is that when they were looking at why water, because they were just desperate. Like, there was no, like, thought process into, like, going into China. It was just like, we got to throw it into more markets because we're going to lose our shirts.
Yeah, sure. Throw it into every single country we could possibly throw it into because we're failing.
We're failing, and we're going to lose $100 million. Back in the 90s, back when $100 million was worth like $500 million today.
Sure.
So they, retroactively, they did research on this, and what they found out was when you have a movie that's that high action, you don't have to translate it. Like, if you were to make a drama or a comedy that was about Western Maryland.
Yeah, the amount of explaining you have to do
to foreign cultures
to the joke
to even like explain Appalachian culture to places like California or New York.
We'll even take it way down.
Mm-hmm.
The Pixar movie Inside Out.
Sure.
So Inside Out, there's a scene in the movie where the girl is 2. And she's throwing a 2-year-old temper tantrum because it's not her favorite food.
Mm-hmm.
So, again, this is like different cultures, different whatever. There's not a lot of dialogue, so what do? Well, because it's animated, in the American film, it's broccoli.
Mm-hmm.
Because Americans, the joke is that toddlers don't like broccoli. But in Asian markets, that's not the joke. So, in Asia, it's bell pepper. Yeah, so they figured out, okay, so if we're going to tell a joke,
right,
it needs to be a joke that is very easily manipulated.
And generic.
And generic, because we can very easily, especially on an animated film, switch out the broccoli for bell pepper, no big deal.
Right,
but when back in Waterworld days,
Right, but the idea is that you don't have to translate an explosion or a chase or a shoot 'em up.
Right.
Like, it's universally understood, so therefore the potential to get more eyes on it is there, and then when you co-opt that with IPs that are established and to have feels, so now you have everything dumbed down to be explosion-oriented IPs that are whatever. That's where all of modern media comes from, because even if it doesn't make enough money here, the idea is we can sell it all over the world, and then eventually there'll be enough dumb people out there to our big dumb explosion movie.
Well, I mean, that just like proves the movie's point of like, if we can manipulate the bell curve so that as many people fit into the C category as possible, like,
right,
it's the poop and fart jokes. Like,
right,
if we can broaden our poop and fart joke audience, then we never have to translate anything because it's just a poop and fart joke.
Right.
Like,
yeah. I hear you. I don't know. I mean, there's so many aspects of this, because like there's a part of me that feels like if you have everyone as a C student, you don't have anybody developing anything. You don't have anybody doing R&D.
Well, the movie addresses that, though. Remember, they said, okay, so the to your point, you can't have an idiocracy society,
right,
and I'm saying idiocracy in the movie idiocracy sense,
right,
where the entire society, from everybody
right,
down.
But they say like the smart people in the middle,
there's
3,000 of them.
Right, so this particular movie, which is why I say it's the elevated idiocracy,
right,
they go a step further, and they're like, we know that we can't have an idiocracy society, so we've specifically engineered and found ways to pinpoint our top 1 or 0.5% of the smartest
There's
people.
There's 3,000 out of 300 million, so that's, I'm going to do math drunk. We're not doing that right now. I'm not doing math drunk. But my point is, it's a very small percentage.
So 3,000 of 3 million.
But my point is of that 3,000, most of them are concentrated on watching and overseeing the 300 million. Whereas if other countries are not doing the same, you have Russia, you have China, you have all of the peak global powers that we're, currently competing with.
Right.
The problem with that then becomes that they are exponentially still growing. Like, they haven't put in these controls. So the idea that they wouldn't create technology that we have not considered, because if you think about where we were in the 90s,
sure,
technologically speaking, if we stopped, right? We stopped technologically in 1990. And
and we're not stealing scientists from other countries.
Right, and then everyone else in the world keeps growing. However much ahead you think we are, it wouldn't matter. Eventually we'd be overtaken. You have to keep growing. Change is the one, inevitability in the world.
I mean, I can agree to that in... there's only so much suspension of disbelief.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe this particular movie is not long enough for me to be required to suspend my
belief. There's not enough aspects to it. It's just the basic idea that, the world's going in this direction. And,
Right. I never get there.
Mm-hmm.
I get there when we're talking about it.
Sure.
But, while I'm watching the movie... It doesn't move forward enough in the global dynamic that I have to suspend my belief to address that fallacy. If that makes sense.
Sure.
But yes, post-review, as a retrospective, yeah, that's odd. Because I would think, we've got, Mexico and Canada.
Right.
Are our neighbors, right?
Right.
So if we suddenly just stagnate...
Right.
Mexico or Canada, take your pick. It doesn't, at that point, it doesn't even matter, because once you're stagnant and they're progressing, given enough time, they will supersede your intelligence level.
Sure.
So now you're a sitting duck.
Right.
Sure.
Yeah, I feel like the idea that you would have autonomy and not invasion at some point.
Sure.
Doesn't make sense to me. The idea that you would be able to... because the whole idea of world and economics and all the things, you have competition. So if you stagnate your competition and stagnate your drive for competition, eventually people are going to be like, I hear your idea of a perfect society, but we want your resources, so fuck off and die. That's exactly what would happen.
So here's the only part in the movie where, the progression and stuff... It started to kind of fuck with my suspension of disbelief, but the movie didn't make too fine a point on it, so I never actually followed the rabbit hole.
Was forced to think about it too much, yeah.
Right. And it was actually breaking the law. Because they made a big deal about this being a precedent case of the man making an illegal left turn.
Mm-hmm.
And here's where my suspension of disbelief and whatever, started to get a little wonky. Because I thought literally this. I was like, okay, so if you're operating a society or manipulating a society that is really stupid, you're talking about the Biff level intelligence, right?
Sure.
So if I'm thinking Biff level intelligence, Biff does not operate a vehicle well.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying he can't. He can, and he does.
Right.
Right? But he doesn't do it...
But you're not even allowed to focus on the road because you have the constant,
right.
distractor.
He doesn't do it well. And now let's add in the complication that the movie presents, which is the, mental disruptors, right?
Sure.
So you've got a zero tolerance crime level because
You're
everything... regardless of your crime, you are immediately killed. But now I'm expected to perform a high-level function task that requires consistent and constant mental focus.
Mm-hmm.
And if I make an illegal left turn, I'm executed. So, I thought about it for, a second, but then I got kind of wrapped up in the film.
Mm-hmm.
But, basically where I was going was, okay, so what would I do? If I was so scared to not want to be executed... As logistically, if I was a stupid person who knew that I would be executed for making an illegal left turn, I would tell my husband, I don't want to drive. Well, which then my husband would say, okay, my wife can't drive because she doesn't want to drive because she's scared of being executed. So that means my husband has to drive. But what if my husband also says, I don't think it's wise for me to die either.
Right.
So nobody drives. So
Well,
then you have a society where no one drives and everybody has to be within walking distance. So you're like, not only are you not progressing, you're regressing.
Well, I think that it also goes into the idea of like New York or like these mega cities where you don't get too far away from. But then that kind of does away from being close to crops that need to be processed, because the whole idea is that you're purposefully technologically regressing to where more people are required to do manual labor.
Right, like it gets a little like the finer details of the movie get a little wonky, and they address it a tiny bit in like a 15-second little blurb about the camera dude. Do you remember the camera guy? He's taking a video of like a TV show.
Sure.
And he's telling Harrison, "Oh, it's so easy. You only have to look at these 3 spots." So like anybody.
Very reductive to cameramen, by the way.
Yeah, like I mean, well, yeah. It is very. It's a very shot in the gut for a cameraman. But regardless, I think, and I might be wrong, but I think what they were trying to get at is that we're trying to, in the secret society, we're trying to elevate technology enough that even the stupid person would be able to operate it. So, like, if I were to really think about it, what I'm hoping is that the smart people underground would put in place a technologically advanced system enough in place that you would have like automated trains or automated buses.
Or automatic cars.
Or automatic cars.
But it's like when you think about society at large now, and like, you know, it's funny, like when I was growing up, everyone just had to know where things were. And then like when you had to like, you know, find a place, you had to figure it out on your own or through a map, or just kind of figure out that like, I bet 2nd Street's next to 1st Street and 3rd is next to 2nd. Like,
I mean, I love the idea that critical thinking was a necessity. Like, you had to know that Main Street meant 1st Street.
Right. Because
Main and 1st
are
the, you know, the same
where
thing.
I grew up, like, the streets were really weird because, like, from, I want to say from north to south, it was 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th. And then from
east to west,
what you had was the names of presidents. So it was Washington,
Lincoln, whatever.
No. It was Washington, Adams.
Oh, they
Jefferson.
were in order.
They were in order.
Oh, so not only did you have to, like, you had to actually logistically know the order the presidents were the presidents. Sure. So fun fact, and I think I've told you this before, that there are actually more 2nd Streets in the United States than there are 1st Streets.
Because Main Street.
Because people, like, cities will decide to name 1st Street Main Street, but they always decide to name 2nd Street 2nd Street. So there is actually half as many Main Streets and 1st Streets than
interchangeable.
Because they're interchangeable, and there's actually more 2nd Streets, which is a weird thing.
You don't always get to 3rd?
You don't always get to 3rd.
Because there's some small-ass towns.
Yeah, so it gets kind of weird.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, the idea that you would have to critically think north to south and east to west.
But, like, the crazy part is like, when I was dating, I met women. And I'm not trying to say this about women specifically. I'm going to, like, expound that this is all people. But there were people that lived in a town or a city their entire ass life. And every time they had to go anywhere, even if they'd been there like every day, like let's say this is my favorite restaurant that we're going to, they're like, I'd, be hanging out there.
No clue where it is.
Right, and they'd be like, I want to go to my favorite restaurant, which is 1.5 miles away, and they're putting it in their GPS, and I'm like, you've never been there before? I thought it was your favorite restaurant. And they're like, oh no, I go like once a week, and I'm like, and it's 1.5 miles away, and you don't know how to fucking get there? And they're like, yeah, I just got a GPS it. It's fine. It's like right here. My phone's right. I mean, what's the
I favorited it.
Yeah, I favorited it.
And I don't even have to type it in. Yeah.
Yeah, the computer knows. And it's like, but you don't know. Right?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's that idea of, I know the highways.
Right.
So I can get 90% there, right?
Uh-huh.
But, like, if you're telling me a new place that I've never been before and you tell me the highway intersection, I can get there. But then once I'm at that point...
You gotta look around a little bit.
Then I have to either GPS it or you have to give me the directions.
Uh-huh.
And I'm hoping that you can give me the directions But if you can't, it's fine.
You just look around.
I'll just, look around to do the GPS. But, like, most people... They
just turn their brains off. They just turn their brains completely off.
I mean, I love that now addresses are actually way more important than the location of things. And I know, you just looked at me like, I'm sorry, that didn't make sense. I know it doesn't make sense because it doesn't make sense. So, like, the idea that something is on 1st and North, like 1st and whatever, Washington, right?
Right.
The idea that something is on 1st and Washington now is much less important than if I were to just say it's on 101 1st Street. Because nobody knows where Washington and 1st intersect.
So, but the GPS will find the exact address.
But the GPS knows where 101 Washington is. Mm-hmm. So it's far less important where things are than what they are.
Right.
Like, that to me is kind of wonky because nobody used to know the addresses of anything.
Right, you just kind of know generally where it was.
Right. You're like, it's...
over by such and such.
Yes. And that to me is a weird dichotomy of like, you've chosen to memorize the least descriptive information, but only because it's least descriptive to humanity at large, but most descriptive to computers.
Well, like, it's funny to me. So, like, I remember when I was coming up and I was taking advanced calc.
Sure.
And, like, when I was coming through, everything was just on the computer, right? Like,
right.
You just put it, like, it was deemed too hard to do without a graphing calculator.
Sure.
And, like, and I remember struggling on a graphing calculator to understand this shit. And most people are. Like advanced calc is hard. But my point is that, like, I remember the teacher being like, I remember calculators were not a thing when I was
right,
coming up.
and those scales.
We used to have, like, all of this weird, like, very manual, analog type of technology to learn this shit. And we used to be able to look at things and kind of just do it on our own in our head. And I was like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Well, it's
and now... you get that with multiplication, with addition, with subtraction, all the things that never used to use a calculator when I was a kid. And now people literally can't add 10 numbers together without a calculator.
Well, it's that idea that, like, you because you've never seen it, but like our daughter was looking at me like I was batshit crazy because I have a scaler. Like, I have a little 6-inch ruler, and it's shaped like a triangle. And you flip it over, and it automatically scales things for you because I used it when I was doing architecture work.
Sure.
So when I was doing architecture work, I could, in my brain and physically in real space, I could say, okay, so if 1 foot is represented by 1 inch, and I need to scale this down by 1/4.
It would be 1/12 at that point. Because 1 inch is...
Exactly. But I could do that. I could draw it and say, okay, I think that's an approximation of what I want, and I could check it with my scaler.
Sure.
And I would be, for the most part, accurate.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And now, because of computer-assisted design, the idea of a scaler is stupid.
Well, I feel like we're getting that way with AI.
Because you can zoom in and zoom out and whatever, and the idea of scaling... is, like, people look at you like, why would you need a scaler? Just zoom out. And you're like, that's...
not a possibility.
That's not the point. You're drawing it on paper.
Right. Well, I feel like here's the problem that we're getting. It's because, like I said, we've gotten 70-80% into customer service. Because we are getting into more and more AI function. There are going to be the need for less and less jobs. Less and less jobs. Because I know my uncle used to work at a car manufacturing plant. And the number of employees he needed to run, like they made 1 car. It was a small plant.
Sure.
They made 1 car. I don't remember what car it was. Doesn't matter. But they literally made 1 model of car. Like, all of that model of car, I believe it was a Chevy or Ford. I don't remember. I know it was an American, like a,
sure.
Whatever brand. So, you've got Chrysler, GM and Ford. Like, those are the 3. It was one of the 3. I don't remember which. But there was 1 model of car that he made. And they made all of it in that factory. And, like, over the years, it went from like 200 employees to 100 to 50 to 25, and it just kept getting more and more and more and more automated until the factory just closed. And I don't think it was that car went away. It's just that they were like, well, we can consolidate this and whatever.
Sure. And I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say that, it's not impressive.
Right.
I mean, if anybody has ever watched how it's made,
sure,
there are a lot of weird engineering things that have been made that are just ridiculously impressive.
Cool. Yeah, they're absolutely
and they're just cool.
Right.
And like the idea that you used to have to need a person to like do this motion, you know what I mean? Like 40 different times, like 40 times a minute. Mm-hmm. And now you have a machine that does that. Like that's
400 times a minute.
400 times a minute. I mean, that's cool as shit. Like that's, I mean, engineering master. But like, what do you do with
that person?
What do you do with that person?
Because I feel like we're going to get to a point where we don't even need the jobs that most people are so replaceable, you don't need them. So the problem we're getting to is we're going to get to a place where we do have an 80-90% unemployment. I think that's coming.
Which is weird to think that this movie literally said that.
Right, but where I think this is going is the idea of the universal basic income. That
terrifies me.
It terrifies me as well.
Like, I mean, I get unemployment. Mm-hmm. That makes sense to me. I get disability. Uh-huh. That makes sense to me. I get military disability. Mm-hmm. That makes sense to me. Sure. But the idea of just, I was born, therefore I deserve.
Though, here's the question of that is, if...
But, like, what do you do if you just flat can't make money?
Well, I mean, we get back to the idea of what I was saying at the beginning of this, which is, if you used to need half of the world's population just to make food to feed the population.
Sure.
And now you need 1%.
Right.
So now the 1% can create food for the 100, but you now have 49% that there really isn't a job for. So we kind of make up some bullshit jobs for them.
Yeah.
But if that job really isn't of benefit, is it do you get rid of that population? Like, because
it's a weird thing to think about, because really what you're talking about is the Great Depression.
Right.
We're going to hire people to dig holes, and we're going to hire people to fill the holes.
Right.
We don't really fucking care about the holes. They don't mean anything. But we hired people to dig them, to give them money, and hired people to like...
I feel like you're conflating things, because like that happened during the Great Depression, but that's not what created the Great Depression. That was actually the Great New Deal. But,
right. No, I went through it.
Yeah.
Well, no. Maybe I went through it really fast. What I meant is you get into that thing, they did it during the Great Depression. I didn't mean that they did it as a catalyst for the... But what I mean is you get into the situation of, I'm going to hire you for a nonsense job, and I'm going to hire somebody else to rectify the nonsense job.
That's also central planning again, where you're just hiring people to hire people, and there's no actual need for them. And a lot of people praised FDR for this, but a lot of people, and myself included, believe that the Great Depression would have ended sooner had you not wasted money for bullshit such as this.
Hole and fill it. Yeah. I mean, it's a weird... That's why I like the movie. Mm-hmm. I mean, I like to think about things. And so, like, that's why I like the movie, is because it begs the question.
So, I'm going to end this up because we're both drunk and I'm feeling sleepy now, but have you seen the movie, what's it called?
Harrison Bergeron.
Have you seen Harrison Bergeron? Have you heard about it? Have you seen TikTok clips of it?
What do you think about it? Like,
what do you think of this idea, and what do you think about universal basic income and where the fuck we're headed, and is anybody else scared?
Or not even, I mean, also, do you think the movie was suppressed on purpose? Like, the fact that I could not find it anywhere.
Sure.
Like, did somebody look at this movie and say, you know what, we're gonna take this movie out and make it very hard to find?
Because it's too close to reality.
It's too close to reality.